My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. After 3 months of complete radio silence from my family, suddenly my mom and sister were blowing up my voicemail with emergency calls and texts about how they really needed to talk. I stared at the lottery confirmation email on my laptop screen: $50 million, winner verified, funds pending transfer. The irony wasn't lost on me. My partner Alex peered over my shoulder at the endless missed calls and whispered, "Don't answer. Something's very, very wrong here." I had no idea how right he was. 5 hours later, I'd discover my parents had lost their house and were facing bankruptcy. And suddenly, their desperate attempts to reconnect with their disappointment daughter made perfect sense. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Growing up, I was the family's designated emotional dumping ground and problem solver, while my sister Sarah basked in the golden child spotlight. When Sarah needed money for college, mom and dad liquidated their retirement fund without hesitation. When I needed help with tuition, they suggested I explore loan options and learn financial responsibility. Sarah's art degree was following her passion, but my practical nursing program was settling for mediocrity. Every family gathering became a tribunal where my life choices were dissected and found wanting. "When are you going to find someone nice and settle down?" Mom would ask, usually right as I walked through the door. "You're not getting any younger, honey," Dad would chime in between bites of the dinner I'd inevitably end up cooking because Sarah was too stressed from her latest creative project. The holidays were the worst. Christmas dinner felt like an interrogation where my single status was the primary crime under investigation. "Your cousin Jessica just had her second baby," Mom would announce, shooting me pointed looks across the turkey. "Such a blessing to see young people building families." Sarah would nod sympathetically while texting her latest boyfriend, somehow managing to look both supportive and superior. I became the family therapist by default, fielding late-night calls about Dad's work stress, Mom's health anxiety, and Sarah's relationship drama. When Sarah's rent was late, I got the tearful phone call about family helping family. When Mom needed someone to drive her to appointments, guess who cleared their schedule? But suggest that maybe Sarah could contribute to Mom's birthday gift instead of expecting me to cover the whole cost. And suddenly, I was being difficult and making everything about money. I'd learned to bite my tongue, keep the peace, and write the checks. Being the reliable one meant being invisible unless they needed something. I told myself this was what family meant: sacrifice, understanding, putting others first. I had no idea how twisted that definition had become until Alex started pointing out patterns I'd been blind to for 32 years. But that revelation was still months away from this moment, when I genuinely believed that being the family disappointment was simply the price of being different. The financial rescue mission started small, but escalated quickly over the years. There was Sarah's emergency car repair that cost me $2,000, money I'd been saving for a vacation that never happened. 6 months later, she posted Instagram photos of her weekend in Napa with friends, but somehow couldn't pay me back because she was between jobs. When Dad's business hit a rough patch, I quietly covered their mortgage payment for 3 months, draining my savings account and maxing out my credit card. Mom promised they'd pay me back as soon as things turned around, but when Dad's business recovered, they celebrated with a kitchen renovation instead of settling our debt. I became the family's unofficial concierge service too, driving Mom to medical appointments because Sarah was too emotional to handle hospitals. House sitting for 2 weeks when they went to Sarah's graduation because we trust you with our home, and somehow always being voluntold to host holiday prep at my tiny apartment because Sarah's place was too small and their house was too stressful to clean. My dating life became a casualty of this endless cycle. I'd cancel dates because of family emergencies, show up exhausted from dealing with their latest crisis, or simply couldn't afford dinner out after covering someone else's expenses. When I tried to explain to potential partners why I was always broke and stressed, it sounded like excuses. "Your family sounds really demanding. One guy said after I had to leave our third date early because Sarah needed emotional support after a breakup. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it from an outsider stung. Another relationship ended when I had to cancel a weekend getaway because dad needed help moving furniture and I didn't have the money to reschedule since I just lent mom $800 for dental work. I started making peace with being single because it seemed easier than trying to explain why my family's needs always came first. The irony was that my single status became their favorite criticism, while their constant demands made it nearly impossible to build a relationship. I was caught in a perfect trap, too drained and broke to date successfully, then shamed for being alone, which made me even more desperate for their approval, which kept me in the cycle of saying yes to everything. It never occurred to me that this wasn't normal family dynamics until Alex came along and started asking uncomfortable questions about why I was always stressed and never had money, despite working full-time as a nurse. I met Alex at the hospital where I worked. He was a physical therapist in the rehabilitation wing, and we kept crossing paths during patient transfers. What started as friendly conversations over coffee gradually became something deeper, though I kept it quiet for months. Not because I was ashamed of Alex, but because I'd learned that bringing anyone new around my family meant subjecting them to interrogation, criticism, and ultimately disappointment when I inevitably had to choose between them and another family crisis. Alex was different from anyone I'd dated before, calm, observant, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings rather than just tolerating them. The first time I had to cancel plans because Sarah needed me to drive her to look at wedding venues, Alex didn't get angry or frustrated. Instead, he asked, "Does she not have a car?" When I explained that she did, but she was too anxious to drive in the city, he paused thoughtfully and said, "That's interesting. How often does your anxiety get accommodated like that?" The question hit me like a slap. I'd never considered that my feelings might deserve the same consideration I automatically gave my family. When mom called during one of our dates, sobbing about dad's latest work drama and needing me to talk her down from her panic spiral, I apologized to Alex and stepped away to handle the crisis. I came back 20 minutes later expecting annoyance, but instead he said gently, "You looked exhausted before you even answered that call. How often does this happen?" That's when the floodgates opened. I found myself telling Alex about the constant financial requests, the emotional labor, the way every conversation somehow became about what I wasn't doing right. Instead of offering solutions or telling me to just deal with it, Alex listened and then said something that changed everything. "It sounds like you're being treated more like an employee than a daughter." For the first time in my life, someone validated what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Alex didn't try to fix my family or convince me to cut them off completely. He just helped me see the patterns clearly. "You realize you've apologized to me 3 times tonight for things that aren't your fault," he pointed out after another interrupted evening. "When was the last time any of them apologized to you for disrupting your plans?" I couldn't remember a single instance. Alex became my reality check. The person who gently pointed out that healthy families don't operate on guilt, manipulation, and one-sided sacrifice. Having someone in my corner who actually saw me as a person worth protecting instead of a resource to be managed was revolutionary. After 6 months of dating, I finally worked up the courage to bring Alex to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I'd prepared him for the usual interrogation, but what happened was somehow worse. They were politely dismissive, treating him like a temporary inconvenience they had to endure. Mom offered him the wobbly chair at the corner of the table without even asking his name first, while Dad barely looked up from his phone to acknowledge the introduction. "So, Alex, what do you do?" Mom asked with the same tone she'd used to question a door-to-door salesman. When he explained his work as a physical therapist, she nodded vaguely and said, "Oh, that's nice," before immediately turning to ask me if I'd picked up her prescription like she'd asked. The subtle digs started almost immediately. "Alex seems very practical," Mom observed while we were setting the table, somehow making it sound like a character flaw. When Alex complimented the house, Dad launched into a monologue about property values and smart investments, clearly establishing that Alex couldn't afford anything in their neighborhood. Sarah arrived fashionably late, bursting through the door with her usual dramatic flair, and suddenly the entire energy shifted. "I have news," she announced, practically vibrating with excitement as she thrust her left hand forward. The engagement ring was massive, easily 3 carats, and Mom literally gasped while Dad jumped up to hug her. "Brad proposed last night at the country club," Sarah squealed, and suddenly Alex and I might as well have been furniture. For the next hour, the conversation revolved entirely around wedding plans, venue options, and how proud they were of Sarah for finding such a wonderful man. Brad was apparently some finance executive who'd already bought Sarah a condo and was talking about starting a family right away. "Finally, we're going to have the wedding we've always dreamed of," Mom said, tears in her eyes. "Sarah's found someone who can really take care of her." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I watched Alex's jaw tighten as Dad pulled out his phone to show off Brad's LinkedIn profile, bragging about his salary and connections. When Sarah mentioned they were thinking about a destination wedding in Italy, Mom started planning how they could help with costs. The same woman who told me to explore loan options for college was already talking about liquidating investments for Sarah's dream wedding. Alex and I left early, claiming I had work the next morning, but really because I couldn't stomach another minute of watching my family worship at the altar of Sarah's success while treating my relationship like an embarrassing phase I'd hopefully outgrow soon. The call came 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Mom's voice had that artificially sweet tone she used when delivering bad news she was trying to frame as reasonable. "Honey, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas this year," she began, and I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "Sarah and Brad have asked for a more intimate celebration, just couples, you know? They want to start establishing their own family traditions." The words hit me like a slap. After 32 years of family Christmases, I was suddenly not welcome because I was single. "What do you mean, couples only?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, it's just going to be me and your father, Sarah and Brad. A nice, quiet evening for the 4 of us." The math was simple and brutal. I didn't count because I didn't have the right relationship status. "Actually, Mom, I'm seeing someone. I could bring Alex." There was a pause that stretched too long, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to barely concealed irritation. "Oh, honey, we've already planned everything for a specific number. It would be really awkward to change the whole dinner now. Plus, you know how Sarah gets about last-minute changes with the wedding stress and everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The same woman who routinely added random neighbors and distant relatives to holiday dinners was suddenly concerned about precise head counts. "You had no problem adding Brad to Christmas," I pointed out. "That's different," she said quickly. "He's Sarah's fiancé. This is serious. You've only been dating this Alex person for a few months." 6 months, actually, but who was counting? "Besides," she continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well, "wouldn't it be better to spend the holidays getting to know each other without all the family pressure? You could have your own little celebration." The dismissal was complete. Not only was I being uninvited, but my relationship was being minimized as some casual fling that didn't deserve family recognition. "I understand if you're disappointed," Mom added, not sounding like she understood at all. "But Sarah's happiness is really important right now. This is such a special time for her." As always, Sarah's feelings mattered more than mine. Sarah's relationship was more valid than mine. Sarah's happiness was worth my exclusion. I hung up feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, but Alex just held me while I cried and said quietly, "Now you know exactly where you stand with them. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" 3 days after the intimate couples-only conversation, Sarah's Instagram story shattered the lie completely. She'd posted a boomerang video of herself addressing wedding invitations with the caption, "Can't wait for everyone to meet Brad at Christmas. Going to be such a fun celebration with the whole family." I screenshotted it with shaking hands and scrolled through her recent posts. There were photos of her shopping for party decorations, a poll asking followers to vote on appetizer options, and a picture of a guest list that I could partially see. It included my aunt and uncle from Portland, my cousins, and even family friends I hadn't seen in years. The intimate celebration for four was actually a massive holiday party where I was the only family member not invited. I felt like I was going to throw up. Alex found me crying on the couch, phone in my lap, staring at the evidence of my family's betrayal. "They lied to me," I said, showing him the screenshots. "It's not couples only. It's everyone only except me." Alex studied the images quietly, then sat down beside me. "This wasn't a miscommunication or a misunderstanding," he said gently. "This was a deliberate choice to exclude you and then lie about why." The truth was so much worse than I'd imagined. They hadn't just uninvited me. They'd crafted an elaborate deception to make their rejection sound reasonable. Mom had practiced that speech about Sarah wanting intimacy while knowing full well they were planning the biggest Christmas gathering in years. "But why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you don't fit their narrative," Alex said. "You're not the success story they want to show off. You're not married to someone wealthy. You're not giving them grandchildren. You're not making them look good to their friends." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't thoughtlessness or favoritism anymore. This is emotional abuse. They're using exclusion as punishment for not being who they want you to be." The word abuse hit me like cold water. I'd always minimized their behavior as favoritism or thoughtlessness, but Alex was right. Normal families don't lie to exclude members. Normal families don't use holidays as weapons. Normal families don't punish you for being single by pretending you don't exist. They knew this would hurt you, Alex continued. And they decided your pain was worth it to avoid the embarrassment of having their unmarried daughter at their party. For the first time, I saw my family's treatment of me clearly, not as love with conditions, but as manipulation with consequences. The day after discovering Sarah's Instagram lies, I was walking past the corner store near my apartment when I saw the lottery sign flashing $50 million jackpot tonight. Usually I'd roll my eyes at the financial irresponsibility of gambling when I could barely afford groceries after covering Mom's latest emergency expense. But something about that moment, the betrayal still fresh, the humiliation of being the family secret they were ashamed to acknowledge, made me march inside and slap $5 on the counter. "Quick pick for tonight's drawing," I told the clerk, feeling stupidly rebellious. It was the most impractical thing I'd done in years, and it felt amazing. When I got home, Alex raised an eyebrow at the lottery ticket I'd stuck to our refrigerator with a banana magnet. "Planning our escape from reality?" he asked with a grin. "Just my small act of rebellion against being the responsible one," I said, but then we started actually talking about it. What would we do with $50 million? Alex said he'd quit his job and open a rehabilitation center for people who couldn't afford physical therapy. I surprised myself by saying I'd disappear for a while, maybe travel to Europe like I'd always wanted but never could because someone always needed my money more than I needed my dreams. "Would you tell your family?" Alex asked, and the question hit me harder than I expected. 6 months ago, the answer would have been automatic. Of course I'd tell them. Of course I'd share. Of course I'd solve all their problems because that's what family does. But sitting there after being deliberately excluded from Christmas, after years of being their ATM and emotional support system while getting nothing but criticism in return, I wasn't sure. "I'd probably give them some money," I said slowly, "but I think I'd make them work for it. No more blank checks to fix problems they created." Alex nodded thoughtfully. $50 million would certainly change the power dynamic. We laughed about it, treating it like the fantasy it obviously was, but that night I caught myself staring at the ticket and imagining what it would feel like to not need their approval anymore, to have enough money that their financial manipulation couldn't touch me. To be able to say no without worrying about being completely cut off. It was just a stupid lottery ticket, a $5 act of defiance, but it represented something bigger, the first crack in my lifelong pattern of putting their needs before my own self-respect. 2 weeks later, I was making coffee before my morning shift when I remembered the lottery ticket still stuck to our refrigerator. The drawing had been Saturday night, and I'd completely forgotten about it with work stress and the ongoing family drama. I pulled up the winning numbers on my phone while stirring cream into my mug, more out of curiosity than any real hope. The first number matched. Coincidence. The second number matched. Weird. By the third matching number, my hands started shaking. The fourth match made me sit down hard on a kitchen chair. When the fifth number matched, I thought I was having a stroke. I stared at my phone screen, then at the ticket, then back at my phone. All 5 numbers plus the Powerball. $50 million. This had to be wrong. I cleared my browser and searched again. Same numbers. I downloaded the official lottery app and checked there. Same numbers. I called the lottery hotline and listened to the automated recording confirm the winning numbers while I held the ticket up to the light, like that would somehow change what was printed on it. "Alex!" I screamed, and he came running from the bedroom, thinking someone was dying. In a way, someone was. The old me, the broke me, the me who had to choose between family approval and self-respect because I couldn't afford to lose their financial safety net. "I think I won the lottery," I whispered, holding up the ticket with trembling hands. Alex looked at me like I'd lost my mind until I showed him the numbers. We spent the next hour verifying it through every possible channel, calling the lottery office, researching what happens next, reading about taxes and legal implications. It was real. After taxes, I'd take home about $30 million. Life-changing money. "We can't tell anyone," I said suddenly, the reality hitting me. "Not yet, not until we figure out what this means." Alex nodded immediately. "Your family is going to lose their minds when they find out." That's exactly what I was afraid of, or maybe what I was hoping for. For the first time in my life, I had something they wanted more than they could manipulate me for. I had power. The question was what I was going to do with it. We sat in our tiny kitchen holding a piece of paper worth more money than I could properly comprehend, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete freedom from needing anything from anyone. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely intoxicating. I called in sick to work the Monday after confirming the win, claiming a nasty flu that would keep me out for at least a week. In reality, I spent that time meeting with financial advisors, tax specialists, and lawyers, learning how to manage sudden wealth responsibly. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of my family criticizing my financial decisions, I was now sitting in conference rooms with people who managed money for celebrities and tech executives. I set up trusts, established investment accounts, and created a plan that would ensure this money lasted for generations if managed properly. The financial advisor, Patricia, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen plenty of lottery winners destroy their lives. "The biggest mistake people make is telling everyone immediately," she warned. "Money changes every relationship you have, usually not for the better. Take time to decide who you can trust." Meanwhile, my family maintained their post-Christmas radio silence. Mom sent a generic Happy New Year text that felt like an obligation rather than genuine sentiment. Sarah posted Instagram stories from her skiing trip with Brad, funded by the engagement gift money Mom and Dad had given them. The same parents who were always too broke to help me were somehow financing my sister's luxury vacation. For the first time, I watched their patterns with clear eyes, instead of through the fog of desperate family loyalty. Dad would complain about money constantly, but always found funds for Sarah's emergencies. Mom would guilt me about family obligations while never expecting the same from her golden child. They'd trained me to believe that asking for fairness was selfish, that pointing out double standards was dramatic, that wanting basic respect was demanding too much. But now, sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing trust documents worth more money than my parents would see in 5 lifetimes, their manipulation felt smaller somehow. They'd spent decades making me feel like I needed their approval to have value, like being single made me incomplete, like my financial struggles were character flaws. Now I realized they'd been projecting their own insecurities onto me while using my guilt and people-pleasing nature to prop up their egos and bank accounts. The radio silence that once would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt now felt like a gift. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to make decisions without considering how they'd affect my family's mood, budget, or opinion of me. It was intoxicating and terrifying and absolutely liberating. In early January, my cousin Emma posted her photo album from Christmas, and I made the mistake of scrolling through it during my lunch break. What I saw made my blood pressure spike so violently I had to step outside for air. The intimate couples-only gathering had been a massive party, at least 30 people crammed into my parents' living room, extended family I hadn't seen in years, family friends, neighbors, even Sarah's college roommate. Everyone was there except me. But the photo that made me physically nauseous was the one of the dining room table. There, between my aunt and my cousin Mark, was an empty chair with a handwritten sign taped to the back that read, "For our missing family member." Emma had even tagged me in the photo with a crying emoji and the caption, "We missed you so much. Hope you're feeling better." The manipulative brilliance of it was staggering. They'd created a public narrative where I was the absent family member who'd chosen not to attend, while they were the loving relatives who'd saved me a seat anyway. Anyone looking at that photo would think I was the problem, the ungrateful daughter who couldn't be bothered to show up for Christmas. The comments from relatives I barely knew were even worse. "So sad when family can't put aside differences for the holidays," and "praying for healing in your family." My mother had orchestrated this perfectly. She'd excluded me, lied about why, then turned my absence into a guilt weapon and a public relations campaign. The empty chair wasn't mourning my absence. It was advertising my failure to be the family member they wanted. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Alex, who immediately called me. "This is psychological warfare," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They're trying to make you feel guilty for something they did to you." For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt furious. Sitting in my car outside the hospital where I worked, staring at photos of a family celebration I'd been deliberately excluded from, I felt something shift permanently inside me. These people had spent Christmas drinking and laughing while publicly shaming me for not being there. They'd turned my pain into their performance art. I realized I didn't just have money now. I had clarity. And for the first time in my life, I was angrier at them than I was at myself. That empty chair was going to haunt them a lot more than it haunted me, especially when they found out what I'd been doing while they were playing their games. January brought a series of subtle but telling changes in my family's behavior. Dad started calling out of nowhere, something he'd never done in my adult life. The conversations were awkwardly casual, like he was reading from a script. "Just wanted to see how you're doing, kiddo," he'd say. Then somehow work in comments about tough times at the company and how the economy is really hitting small businesses hard. He'd never talked to me about his work before. I'd learned more about his business struggles in 3 phone calls than I had in the previous decade. Mom's approach was different, but equally transparent. After months of treating me like I didn't exist, she suddenly wanted to catch up and reconnect as mother and daughter. She'd text asking about my work, my health, my plans, with an enthusiasm that felt performed rather than genuine. "I know we haven't talked much lately," she said during one forced conversation, "but I've been thinking about how important family is, especially during difficult times." The phrase "difficult times" kept appearing in every interaction, but Sarah's behavior was the most telling of all. My sister, who'd barely acknowledged my existence on social media for years, suddenly became my biggest fan online. She started liking every Instagram post I made, commenting with hearts and miss you messages on photos from months ago. She even shared an old throwback photo of us as kids with a caption about sister love that felt like she was trying to rebuild a relationship that had never actually existed. When I posted a picture of the lunch Alex and I had grabbed after a hike, Sarah immediately commented, "You two are so cute. We should all hang out soon." This from the woman who'd barely spoken to Alex at dinner and had specifically requested he not be invited to Christmas. The desperation was becoming obvious, but they were still trying to be subtle about it. No direct asks for money yet, just a coordinated campaign to re-establish emotional connection and remind me of family bonds. They were laying groundwork, testing the waters, seeing if I was still the same pushover who'd write checks to keep the peace. What they didn't know was that I was watching their performance with $30 million in the bank and a completely different perspective on family loyalty. I responded politely to their outreach, but didn't take the bait. I was curious to see how long they'd maintain this charade before the real desperation showed through. By February, the subtle approach was abandoned completely. Mom started calling with increasingly dramatic emergencies that all seemed to require immediate financial intervention. First, it was her car. The transmission had suddenly failed, and they needed $3,000 for repairs because Dad's work situation was too unstable to finance it. When I suggested they look into used car lots instead of expensive repairs, she got defensive and started crying about how everyone else has family they can count on. 2 weeks later, Sarah needed help with wedding venue deposits because Brad's company was going through restructuring and his bonus had been delayed. "It's just $15,000, Mom pleaded, and you know Sarah's been dreaming of this wedding her whole life. We can't let her down now." The audacity was breathtaking, asking me to fund the wedding I'd been excluded from celebrating. When I didn't immediately agree, Sarah started texting me directly, something she'd never done before. "I know we haven't been as close lately," her message read, "but I'm really hoping you can help me make my dream wedding happen. You know how much family means to me." The same family that had literally put an empty chair in my place at Christmas. Dad's temporary work situation became the next crisis, requiring a $20,000 bridge loan to keep the business afloat until things turned around. Mom's voice was getting more strained with each call, the artificial sweetness replaced by barely controlled panic. "I don't know who else to turn to," she said, and for the first time, I believed her. They were clearly in serious financial trouble, which explained the sudden interest in rebuilding our relationship. The requests kept escalating: Sarah's dress alterations, Dad's business insurance, Mom's medical bills that weren't fully covered. Each call came with increasingly elaborate explanations about why they couldn't handle it themselves and increasingly guilt-heavy reminders about family obligations. "You've always been so responsible with money," Mom said during one particularly desperate conversation. "And we know you've got that good nursing job. Surely you could help us through this rough patch." They had no idea that their responsible daughter was sitting on more money than they'd see in several lifetimes. Watching them perform this increasingly frantic dance of manipulation and desperation, part of me wanted to end their suffering immediately. But a bigger part of me wanted to see exactly how far they'd go before telling the truth about their situation. In March, my careful facade started cracking when my cousin Emma mentioned to my aunt that she'd heard I'd been out sick from work for weeks. Small towns talk, and somehow this information made its way back to my mother, who called immediately with barely concealed panic in her voice. "Emma said you've been off work for almost 2 months, she said without even greeting me. "Are you okay? Did you lose your job?" I could hear the calculations happening in real time. If I was unemployed, their financial safety net had just disappeared. When I explained I'd taken extended sick leave for stress and was considering my options, the tone shifted dramatically. Instead of concern for my well-being, I got a lecture about responsibility and poor life choices. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Mom said, her voice sharp with frustration. You can't just quit working because you're stressed, honey. That's not how the real world works. The irony was stunning. The same woman who'd been begging me for money for months was now scolding me for being financially irresponsible. Dad called later that day to pile on. Your mother's worried sick about you, he said, though his tone suggested he was more worried about his own problems than my welfare. You can't just walk away from a good job because you're having some personal issues. You need to think about your future. Sarah's approach was different but equally cruel. She started making passive-aggressive comments on social media about people who give up when things get tough and posting inspirational quotes about perseverance through difficult times. When I didn't respond, she called directly. I'm really concerned about you, she said, not sounding concerned at all. This whole unemployment thing seems really irresponsible, especially when family members are counting on you. There it was. The admission that they'd been counting on me financially, delivered as criticism for not being available to be used. The most twisted part was that even while calling me irresponsible and unemployed, they still expected me to help with their emergencies. Mom actually asked if I could figure out some way to help with Dad's business crisis, suggesting I take out loans or ask Alex for money. They wanted to shame me for being broke while simultaneously expecting me to fund their lifestyle. It was manipulative gaslighting at its finest, making me feel guilty for problems I didn't have while demanding solutions I supposedly couldn't provide. Watching them reveal their true nature so completely was almost worth the months of deception. The call came on a Thursday evening in late March, and I knew from Mom's first sob that the charade was finally over. Honey, I need to tell you something, she began, her voice thick with tears that sounded genuine for the first time in months. We're going to lose the house. The whole story came pouring out between choked sobs and panicked breaths. Dad had lost his job 6 months ago, but had been too proud to admit it. They'd been living off credit cards and home equity loans, thinking he'd find something quickly. Meanwhile, Dad had been making increasingly desperate investment decisions, trying to make up the shortfall fast by putting their remaining savings into cryptocurrency and penny stocks that had tanked spectacularly. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, maxed out on credit cards, and facing foreclosure in 60 days. I don't know what we're going to do, Mom cried. We've never been in a situation like this. We could lose everything. The house, our credit, our whole life. Then came the ask, delivered with the full force of 30 years of practiced manipulation. I know you're going through your own struggles right now with the job situation, but you're the only one who might be able to help us. Could you possibly take out some kind of loan? Your credit is good, and banks trust nurses. Maybe a personal loan for $50,000? We could pay you back once Dad finds work. When I hesitated, the emotional weapons came out in full force. Family helps family, sweetheart. That's what we do. Your father and I sacrificed everything for you and Sarah. We paid for your college, supported you through nursing school, gave you a place to come home to when you needed it. None of that was true, but she was crying too hard to care about facts. I can't believe I'm even having to ask my own daughter for this, she continued, her voice turning sharper. But what choice do I have? Sarah and Brad are just starting out. They can't help. You're the only one with a stable career and good credit. Then came the final blow. How can you be so selfish when your own parents are about to be homeless? Is that really the kind of person you want to be? I sat in my kitchen, listening to my mother beg me to destroy my credit to fix problems she'd hidden from me for months, while $30 million sat in investment accounts she knew nothing about. The manipulation was so textbook, it was almost impressive, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't falling for it. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Mom, before we talk about money, I need to ask you something. Why wasn't I invited to Christmas? The sobbing stopped abruptly. There was a long pause, then her voice returned, significantly less tearful. What does that have to do with anything? We're about to lose our house and you're bringing up Christmas? I'm bringing it up because I want to understand something, I said calmly. You told me it was couples only, but I saw Emma's photos. 30 people were there, everyone except me. That's That was different, she stammered. Sarah needed support during her engagement, and we thought it would be less stressful. You lied to me, I interrupted. You told me it was intimate when you'd planned a huge party. You excluded me specifically, and then put an empty chair with a sign to make me look like the bad guy. Mom's tone shifted to indignant. You're being incredibly dramatic about this. It was one holiday, and frankly, your attitude lately has been very difficult. Sarah and Brad wanted to celebrate their engagement without any negativity. So my presence would have been negativity? I asked. What about all the years of you criticizing my single status? What about the double standard where Sarah gets financial help for everything while I get lectures about responsibility? I cannot believe you're making this about yourself when your father and I are facing homelessness, Mom snapped, her voice sharp with anger now. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always twist everything to be about your feelings instead of thinking about what the family needs. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. In one breath, she'd dismissed years of unequal treatment as my imagination and reframed my legitimate questions as selfish drama. We gave you everything, she continued, her voice rising. We raised you, fed you, loved you, and this is how you repay us? By bringing up petty grudges when we're desperate for help? Petty grudges, I repeated quietly. Is that what you call being excluded from family celebrations and treated like a disappointment for 30 years? You're being ridiculous, she said firmly. Family means showing up when people need you, not keeping score of imaginary slights. Are you going to help us or not? It was masterful manipulation, minimizing my legitimate concerns while positioning any refusal to help as betrayal. But I wasn't the same person who would have crumbled under this pressure 6 months ago. I'm not going to take out any loans, Mom, I said quietly, my voice steadier than it had ever been during one of these conversations. I'm not putting my financial future at risk to fix problems you created and hid from me for months. You selfish, she started, but I cut her off. Actually, Mom, there's something I should probably mention. I won the lottery 2 months ago. $50 million. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What did you say? I won the lottery. The night after you uninvited me from Christmas, actually. Alex and I have been meeting with financial advisors and lawyers, getting everything set up properly. Another long pause, then an explosion. $50 million? Her voice cracked with the volume. You've had $50 million this whole time, while we've been begging you for help, while we're losing our house? I've had it for about 10 weeks, I corrected calmly. And yes, I've watched you beg me for help while I process what our relationship actually means. I can't believe this, she said, her voice cycling rapidly between shock and fury. You've been lying to us. You've been pretending to be broke while we're facing bankruptcy. I haven't been pretending anything, I said. You assumed I was broke when you heard I took time off work. I never confirmed or denied it. Dad must have grabbed the phone because suddenly his voice was shouting in my ear. $30 million and you've been watching us suffer? What kind of daughter are you? The kind who needed to see who you really were, I replied. The kind who wanted to understand what family actually meant to you. This is insane, Mom's voice came from the background. Give us the phone back. We need to talk about this properly. You need to help us immediately. We're family. The word family that had been used to guilt me for years now sounded like exactly what it was, a transaction term. They weren't calling because they loved me or missed me or wanted to rebuild our relationship. They were calling because they needed my money, and now they knew just how much money that was. Here's what I'm willing to do, I said, cutting through Dad's shouting. I'll pay off your mortgage and cover basic living expenses for 6 months while you get back on your feet. But I'm not funding the lifestyle that got you into this mess, and I'm not paying for Sarah's destination wedding. The line went quiet except for heavy breathing. What do you mean you won't pay for the wedding? Mom's voice was dangerous now. like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. I mean, Sarah's wedding is a luxury, not a necessity. You want me to bail you out of bankruptcy so you can throw a $100,000 party? That's not happening. She's your sister, Dad exploded. This is her dream wedding. How can you be so cruel? The same way you could exclude me from Christmas, I replied evenly. The same way you could lie to my face about it being couples only. The same way you could put up an empty chair to shame me publicly while planning the biggest party of the year. You're going to hold one mistake against us forever? Mom demanded. When we're desperate and need help? It wasn't one mistake, Mom. It's been 30 years of mistakes. 30 years of treating me like a backup plan while Sarah gets the starring role. I'm not rewarding that pattern with millions of dollars. Sarah must have grabbed the phone because suddenly she was screaming at me. You vindictive bitch! I can't believe you'd ruin my wedding because you're jealous. This is my one special day. Your special day that I wasn't good enough to attend, I reminded her. Your special day that you expect me to fund after excluding me from the engagement celebration. We're your family. Dad was back on the phone. If you don't help us, you'll regret this forever. We'll never speak to you again. Is that a threat or a promise? I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. You're making a huge mistake, Mom said finally, her voice cold as ice. Don't come crawling back to us when you realize money can buy you a family. You're right, I said. Money can buy me a family, but it can show me who my real family is, and apparently, it's not you. You'll be sorry, Sarah hissed. When you're old and alone with no one who loves you, you'll remember this moment and wish you'd done the right thing. I am doing the right thing, I said. I'm finally putting myself first. I hung up and immediately blocked all their numbers. The silence in my kitchen felt like freedom. Within a week, the family smear campaign was in full swing. My aunt called to tell me she was disappointed in how I was abandoning family in their time of need. Apparently, Mom had spun the story to make me sound like a heartless miser who was hoarding millions while my parents faced homelessness. According to their version, I'd cruelly refused to help with basic necessities and was punishing Sarah for being successful. The manipulation was masterful. They'd conveniently left out the Christmas exclusion, the years of unequal treatment, and the fact that I had offered to pay their mortgage and living expenses. Social media became a battlefield. Sarah posted a series of heartbroken stories about having to downsize her wedding dreams because some people value money over family bonds. She never mentioned me by name, but the message was clear to anyone who knew our situation. Distant relatives started commenting with support for poor Sarah and judgment about people who forget where they came from. But not everyone bought their narrative. My cousin Emma, who'd posted those Christmas photos, reached out privately with a long apology. I've been thinking about that empty chair ever since our conversation, she wrote. It was really messed up that they excluded you and then made a public spectacle of your absence. I should have said something. My Uncle Mike called to confess he'd always noticed the family's double standard. Your parents have been asking me for advice about Sarah for years, but never mention you unless they need something fixed, he said. I didn't realize how bad it was until your aunt told me what really happened at Christmas. Even some of Sarah's college friends reached out, apparently having witnessed years of casual cruelty disguised as family teasing. She used to make fun of you being single all the time, one former roommate admitted. I always thought it was weird how mean she could be about your personal life. The extended family was splitting into camps, those who believed my parents' victim story, and those who were finally seeing the patterns they'd ignored for years. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about winning the family popularity contest. I had Alex, I had a few genuine relatives who supported me, and I had enough money to build whatever life I wanted. The people who truly mattered were already in my corner. 6 months later, the dust has finally settled, and honestly, I couldn't be happier with how everything turned out. I did follow through on my promise to help my parents avoid foreclosure, but with strict conditions attached. I paid off their mortgage and set up a monthly allowance that covers basic living expenses. No more, no less. Dad had to take a job at Home Depot, something that apparently wounded his pride but did wonders for his perspective on money. Mom had to attend financial counseling sessions and prove she could stick to a budget before receiving each month's payment. They hate the boundaries, but they're not homeless, and they're slowly learning to live within their means instead of expecting bailouts for every poor decision. Sarah's fairy tale ending imploded spectacularly when Brad discovered the family's financial chaos during their joint wedding planning session. Turns out a finance executive doesn't want to marry into a family that hides bankruptcy and begs relatives for money. Sarah tried to pin the broken engagement on me, claiming I'd ruined her life by not funding their lifestyle. But even she eventually had to admit that lying to your fiancé about your family's financial stability probably wasn't sustainable long term. She moved back in with our parents and got a job at a marketing firm, experiencing financial responsibility for the first time in her 30-year life. Alex and I got married in a small ceremony surrounded by people who actually love and support us. My Uncle Mike walked me down the aisle, Emma was my maid of honor, and several of my work friends filled the seats that would have been occupied by people who treated me like an ATM for 3 decades. We bought a beautiful house with a guest room specifically for the family members who actually deserve our time and energy. I've started a scholarship fund for nursing students from difficult family situations, because I understand now what it feels like to love people who can't love you back properly. My parents still tell people I'm selfish and money hungry, but I sleep soundly every night knowing I chose self-respect over family approval. So tell me honestly, did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments.